So today I want to talk about how to use my favorite music making application on one of my favorite music making devices, and that is Logic Pro on the iPad Pro. Now, this is a mildly controversial DAW because unlike a lot of digital audio workstations, or DAWs, which are just software used to make music, this one is a subscription, and subscriptions are pretty controversial, but I will say the price is pretty solid. For $5 a month or $50 a year, you get access to a very comprehensive suite of production and performance tools. And you get it all in a thin and light device. Even this iPad, the 12.9-inch M2 iPad Pro, which is the biggest iPad you can buy right now, is still a really reasonably thin and light machine. And with recent updates, this can be used with an external monitor. It could always be used with an audio interface and a MIDI controller, but now you can basically turn this into a music production desktop if you want, which I've done before. So I mentioned that all to say that I find this to be the most interesting piece of software to use to create music now. It's not the best and it's certainly not perfect, but it is probably the most exciting. And today I'm just going to walk through how I use it and show you how you can use it. I'm not a certified expert, I'm not affiliated with Apple, and there are probably things about how to use this that I don't know. So if I missed anything, feel free to let me know in the comments, and hopefully you learned something from this video. Okay. So it's important to note that Logic Pro on iPad is not really a one-to-one copy of Logic Pro on a Mac. In fact, I don't have proof of this, but my theory is that Logic Pro on iPad is actually built on the base foundation of GarageBand for iPad. And instead of trying to back convert the desktop version onto iPad, they added as many features as possible from the desktop version to GarageBand and then called it Logic Pro. I believe this is the screen you'll see when you start. You have this icon up here to find any recent locations, or you'll just see your recent projects. If you've never made a project before, I'm actually curious what it shows. I can't remember because I already had GarageBand projects when I started. So it shows some of my very old GarageBand projects, which you can see go way far back, as well as now my most recent Logic projects. So I want to get something out of the way. When you start, you'll be taken to this page. You'll hit that plus icon, and now you're in New Empty Project. You're going to see a lot of stuff on this page, including all of these lessons, which can be really cool, and I actually do recommend going through them, either right now or after you watch this video. Then you're going to see featured sound packs. All of these packs are included with the price, and many of them are also in GarageBand. Oh hey, there's one I don't have. So I'm going to tap Get. It's going to quickly download on my Wi-Fi and install it, and now it's something I have. There are artist packs and producer packs, instrument packs, and general sound packs with different themes. These add a lot of different plugins and samples and loops that you can use when you're producing music, and I like to have them all installed, even if I don't necessarily seek out individual ones. But yes, Manage Packs pulls that window down, and just Get All will download all of them. Or it says there's a little bit more than I have, so let's get all. I'm missing 148, so sure. I don't really know what I was missing. I guess it was Take a Day Trip. Sure, now I have that. So I'm done with my sound library. I have everything installed, and this is the big getting started page, right? Now we have new project settings, which is cool. You can choose your basic time signature, your tempo, your sample rate, the key you're going to be in, or at least what's being tracked. You can play notes in any key, I think, even if you have a key signature applied. But this is kind of where my opinion might be controversial, but I prefer to make my songs using live loops. Live loops is a feature that is very similar to the session view in Ableton Live. It's very similar to a lot of different groove boxes and devices. Something like this Novation Launchpad, which currently isn't supported to trigger loops on the software, although it does on the desktop version. I like loops because it feels like a more creative way to get ideas going. If you've ever seen an artist on stage making loop recordings where they'll play one instrument and then play another and then sing something over it and slowly start to build a song up, that's kind of what I do when I make new songs, but I do it in sort of slow motion because I'm adding new ideas every time. I'm not making something I've already made, I'm making something new. Now, if you don't want to use loops and you want to just record into a traditional linear arranger, you can switch between the two with this icon up here. This is your loops mode, and this is your normal tracks mode. What do they call it here? If we go to a new track, they call it just tracks. There you go. This tracks method is how many people have made music in computers for a very long time. There's nothing wrong with using it. And if you're more interested in that, I recommend watching videos about that or going through their trainings on how to use these different interfaces. But for me, I like creating in live loops. Now, this can be confusing because we're starting in live loops and we're seeing this loops here. These are two totally different concepts. The loops I'm creating would also be known as clips in Ableton. But here in Logic, they're called loops. Now, they also have Logic loops, many of which are similar to GarageBand loops. And these are referring to little sections of pre-made either MIDI compositions, which is taking note data to trigger music, to trigger audio, or audio loops, which is what it sounds like, recorded audio that then loops. You have the loops on the left over here, and then you have the loops we're actually creating in the live loops mode. And I do think that nomenclature is really confusing, but they are separate. I don't build my songs using pre-made loops. You can, and it can be a really good way to learn. But you start getting into this territory where you're gonna use loops other people use, and your songs might sound a lot like other people's songs, and it will make it tricky to copyright them. It'll make it tricky to register them with ASCAP or BMI or anything like that. I don't like messing with that. And so these loops on the right that we're talking about, that's our interface for making something. For example, I made a project last night, or actually 2 days ago, 2 or 3 days ago, that was inspired by the social network. So I called it a group of social people. And these are what these loops look like. These are not pre-made Logic loops. These are my loops that I made by playing a keyboard directly into Logic. The first one was this one. Turn off the metronome. This is the next one. Some drums. And I can trigger the entire scene at the bottom here. This is the fully built out version. But if I want to go back to just playing those first three, I'll just trigger that scene. And that's how I build. Once you've built out a whole thing you like, you can actually then record by performing it directly into that arranger mode, which is done with that little button right here. That's getting ahead of ourselves, but that's when I would go into arranger, or tracks on here, is after I've already built out a whole scenes version or live loops version, and then record a live performance into the arranger or the tracks, where I can then export those out into a different piece of software or finish them here. Anyway, let's go back to a blank project, our project 18. So, like I said, stuff on the right, they're loops, but they are not loops. I personally don't want loops. I want to create my own MIDI information or audio information. We don't want loops. We're hitting that little back arrow. Now we're in browser, and let's do an instrument patch. Now there are a lot of these. They're ordered by number and then alphabetically, and it's easy to get lost here, but it's very simple to filter. This little icon on the upper right of the instrument patches section lets you filter by a huge amount of options. So let's say we just want keyboard sounds, and we want it to be acoustic. That's good enough for now. We can hit that icon again, and now all of these are acoustic keyboards. Learner's piano, appropriately named. We're going to drag this to create an instrument track. Now we have one. And on the very lower right, there's this little keyboard icon. If we click this, we now have a MIDI keyboard. And we can play horrible sounding notes. Now, there's nothing wrong with playing with just this, but you can also filter it by scale, which you can do by hitting the scale button here on the right. And then you can choose a root note or a scale, or just use the default C major and click activate. Now every note will be in that scale. It sounds horrible. But this is a good way to lock into a specific scale. If we hit the little three dots next to that, we can see surface settings. We can change the size. We have polyphonic pitch bend. I'm not going to get into all of that, but it's nice to have. We also have different view options. And I believe, yep, if we tap it again, we can get a full page here of keys. So now, low, very high. And you can change the octave, which is the range of notes you have available. With this little setting on the left here, you can see it going up and down. -1, 0, +1. Now, this gives you a lot of flexibility over which notes you're going to play. And if you hit on the left right here, you actually have a bunch of different play surfaces. So this icon on the right loads the play surface up, and this icon on the left here is how you choose the type of play surface. And you can see we have a bunch of weird options. We could do drum pads. We could play our piano with drums. We could use a fretboard. People might feel more comfortable using a little guitar there. Chord strips, which is really cool, lets you play different pre-described chords. Prescribed chords? I don't know. Anyway. So these different notches are different, I think, octaves of the chord or different forms of the chord. And this is a pretty easy way to start building out tracks. So let's say you liked that. It's not amazing, but it is what it is. Right now, the BPM, or the beats per minute of this project, is 120. So if I hit play and I just turn on the metronome, this little icon right here, that's 120. So if we wanted to play along, we'd have to go. That doesn't sound terrible, and 120 is a pretty common BPM, but you can also tap your tempo or choose a specific custom tempo. What I usually do is tap my tempo in, so dun, 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 dun. And it looks like I'm about at 100. So I'm going to actually tap in here and change it to 100 just for the simplicity. Now, yeah, that sounds all right. So right now we're in trigger mode, which means if there was a clip here and we tapped it, we would trigger it. What we want is to tap this little circle, and now we're in record mode. Now this icon right here, this 1, 2, 3, 4, is a pre-count. And that is going to play the metronome for a few little beats before we actually start recording. This is essential for me. Not everyone uses it, but I appreciate that to keep my BPM in mind. So let's record something. And I'm done. I'm going to tap it again. And I want to hear it. Oh, but now it's going to play, or it's going to record over it. I don't want to record over it. So we have to go back into trigger. Now let's trigger it. Okay, but now there's this dead space. That's not what I wanted. Well, we can fix that. So you're going to see in this little bar that I'm dragging, there is this little knob icon. That is your instrument. It's showing you every bit of sound generation and effect on that track, learner's piano. Let's tap it again to close it. On the right, there's the mixer. This is showing us a bunch of information. Again, those same effects are showing. And if we hit play, we can see how loud this track is. But let's close that. What we want is this little pencil icon. This is going to immediately open a window to show us these actual notes we just played. But we can see it's 5 bars instead of 4, so there's this blank one. Now if we drag this little arrow on the right over, Now it's 4. And you'll notice it's just a clean circle on this icon now. If we trigger it, it'll just keep playing notes because there's no blank space anymore. Now we've got a little idea in the background. So we could keep the metronome going, or we could turn it off and just have this go. Now again, if I want to re-trigger it, I'm going to tap, oh, that doesn't work. So we're going to hit stop twice to take it back to the beginning, and then re-trigger it. There we go. Let's get another sound in here. And let's get some drums. I want drums and full kit and after party, sure. Dragging that over, and it's defaulted down to a drum pad play surface so that we have kind of clear ideas of what we're going to be playing. I have noticed there's a little bit of lag sometimes between the first time I hit a pad and the noise it makes. I think that's a bug and I hope they fix it, but it's not a deal breaker. Something else you might notice is the sound is getting louder the higher I hit the pad. So it's not about how hard I tap my screen, it's about where I tap the pad. This is useful because an organic sounding performance, you don't just want the loudest version of the note over and over again. Some variation can be really nice in making your beats sound more human. Let's turn our metronome back on, go back into record mode, and let's record some drums. So that was horrible, but I'm going to keep it just for the sake of example. Now I tapped that record before it completed that 4th bar, or 2 bars actually, I believe. Yep, just 2. I tapped that so that it would just keep playing that circle without us having to go and delete that blank space. If we wanted to, we could actually make it so that the default for this project is a set amount of bars so that we don't have to manually fix every loop. To do that, first we'll go to play, and we're going to have cell length. Let's see, this is cell. Let's go cell defaults. Play 4 is cell length right there. And we got here with this I button. If we click the I again, we want cell defaults. So we're clicking where it says track or cell. We want cell defaults. Play, we want 4 or 8 or 2, whatever you want. The cell length is the length of the loop or cell. And record right now is automatic. That's why we had that blank space in our first one. And instead, we're going to choose cell length. So now, no matter what, anytime I record a new cell or loop, it's going to be 4 bars because it's going to match the cell length that we chose under play. So let's delete this by hitting the edit icon right here. So instead of record, we're hitting edit next to it, and we're going to delete that loop. Go back to record, and now if we record again, we're going to have 4 bars to play what we want. Now it's going to loop. But you may notice it sounds really offbeat. So let's fix that. We're going to hit this pencil icon again, the one at the bottom, not the one at the top. And now if we pinch and zoom out, we can see the entire loop again. Now you'll notice some of these notes here are not lining up with the lines next to them. The lines are a perfect representation of what would be called on the grid or on beat, and we're currently not. And so if we wanted to fix that, there's a few ways to do it, but the most simple for me is make sure we're in region, and we're already seeing quantize here. Quantizing is how you snap the notes to get them closer to the grid. Again, you would find that under I if you weren't seeing it, and under quantize. Now, right now, quantize is off, and you can't change any of these options until quantize is on. So let's turn it on. Tap where it says off, and I usually do 8th notes or 16th notes. For drums, let's do 16th notes, or 1/16. Now you can see everything just moved completely onto the grid. When I was just starting, this is where I would have stopped. When I was younger, perfect, but I like to humanize my drums a little bit, or all of my notes. So even if I quantize something, even though the goal should really be to play as well as we can, if we're going to quantize, I recommend making it a little bit more human by reducing the amount of strength on the quantization to around 80%. This is subjective, you can do whatever you want. This is what I would do. Now when we play it, it's going to be offbeat sometimes, but it's also going to be more on beat than it was. Let's hit the pencil again to hide this, and go back to trigger and listen to what we have. Oh right, we're going to want to hit stop twice to bring that back to the beginning, and I'm actually going to turn off the metronome too. Now let's trigger this whole scene. And so you may not be able to tell, but we're actually at a bit of a crossroads. When I generally build out my tracks, what I would normally do is just add over and over a bunch of them, right? So let's go to the browser. Let's clear our filters here. Let's add a bass. I'll just drag this over. Let's add a synth. Sure. Drag this over. Let's add a mallet. Drag that over. Then I would just start recording cells for all of these in the same scene here. But you could also go into the pencil icon, hit this little bottom area that we've been using to trigger, and duplicate. And then maybe we duplicate it again. Although I would actually recommend generally just duplicating once if you're building out that way, because alternatively, in the method I normally use, I would just record all of these new cells below these and then duplicate a few times, and then I would delete redundant ones so that I'm building out a track. This is easier to show with more loops already created, so let's go into a project I've already made. Yesterday, I made this little beat that I put on my Instagram called Sweet Heat. This is what it sounds like. Very simple, only 4 tracks right now, only one scene. But if we wanted to, we could build this up by going to Edit, clicking Duplicate, let's click Duplicate again, and what I want is for 3 here, the one furthest to the right to be the most built up version, and for 1 to be the most simple version, and for 2 to be something in the middle. So I've just deleted the drum, analog haze, and bass from scene 1. Let's delete the bass from scene 2, go into trigger mode, stop twice, and now scene 1 is really simple. Let's add some drums. And bass. Great. And so you can kind of see in the most simple way how I would build something out. Then if I wanted to record that into the arranger, we would hit this little record icon I talked about before. We'd hit record here and start with this first scene. Now we're recording into the arranger that we talked about, into that tracks view. Let's trigger our second scene, get the drums going. Stop the vibraphone or vibraphone just by tapping it. And we'll tap it again in time. Let's bring it back in. And you can do that on a per cell or loop basis. Just tap it again to stop it. But instead, we're just going to stop entirely. Now, if we go into the tracks view, this little toggle over here, we can see grayed out this entire recording that we've just made. And I'm dragging these elements a little bit to move it. If we want this to actually play, hit this top button here at the bottom. Now we're just in this tracks view and we're looking at the recorded loops as recorded static tracks rather than loops that are playing. And that's how you turn a live loop track into an arranged track. A little bit in the weeds, but worth knowing. If we go back to our beginning project here, something else I want to show you is that you don't just have to use these standard instrument patches or loops or whatever is built into Logic. Although there's a bunch of really cool built-in stuff. This plus button will bring up a create new track menu. Now if you have an audio interface plugged in, you can use an external microphone, or we can use the iPad microphone here. If we had some headphones plugged in, that would be the best way to do that. And unfortunately, most iPads don't have a headphone jack, which is a huge failure by Apple, and I hope they start adding them back, especially now that their Pro DAW is on iPad. But you can record audio in or drag audio loops in. You can use Drummer, which is a drum assistant that I recommend watching separate videos about. I'm not going to get into it. You can use Pattern to use pattern sequencing, which I'm also not going to get into. And then you can use MIDI to create a blank track here. And so you'll notice we have instrument 29 and insert a software instrument to use the play surface. This was really confusing when I started. I was like, well, what do I do next? We hit this little gear icon and we can see we have a fully blank track line. So instead of this one where we see alchemy, or this one where we also see alchemy, or learner's piano, which is a sampler with an EQ and a bunch of effects, instrument 29 is blank. So we could have a MIDI effect, an instrument, or audio effects. Let's hit instrument. Now we can see all of Logic's instruments, so all of their drums, drum synth, drum kit designer, drum machine designer, their quick sampler, sample alchemy, which is really cool, and their sampler multi-sample, which plays sample-based instruments from the desktop version of Logic. Studio instruments like strings and horns, synthesizers, these are all of the Logic synthesizer engines, and it's really cool to see them here. Utilities, which I actually don't know very much about. Vintage keys, which is a series of vintage key sounds like electric piano, mellotron, clav, and organ. And then below we see audio units. Audio units are plugins. They're ways to bring sounds and effects that were made by other creators, not Apple, into Logic. And you'll see I have a lot of these because when I started getting into iPad music production, I would just buy a ton of audio units. So let's start with one that's tried and true. We'll hit Korg and we'll hit Module Pro. And I will say that I wish Apple didn't make you go by manufacturer, because as much as I respect all these amazing manufacturers, I don't always remember who the manufacturer is. They're just a list of all of my plugins by name, but that is something hopefully they'll add in the future, or maybe a setting I don't know how to find. So if you know, please let me know in the comments. Now, this is not what I remember Module looking like. You know, it's nice it has some easy controls here, but this isn't really what I was hoping for. We'll double tap it, and that is the Module I know and love. So now I'm using, terribly, the little MIDI controller here, the built-in play surface, to trigger a third-party plugin. This one is Korg Module Pro. And Korg Module Pro has a bunch of really nice little presets to play different sounds, including cinema piano, which I love. And generally I don't play using this little MIDI surface. I usually plug in a controller. But I love that you can, because it means you can take this standalone small tablet and turn it into a much bigger studio and have the same exact project with the same exact power and the same exact instruments available all the time. It's really the closest version to a dream I've had for music production for a long time. And it's certainly not perfect, like I said, but it is really cool. So that is how you would add a third-party instrument. And if you wanted to then add a third-party plugin, you could do it here with the plus sign, or you could add the audio effect plugin by going back and hitting this here. Recently I've used Cosmonaut, which is a fun delay one. So let's add Cosmonaut. Double tap again, and let's choose Clean Echo. Let's change it to counting sheep. And you don't just have to use third-party effects. If we hit this pencil, this is our third pencil icon in this interface. Pencil just means edit, basically. Let's tap that and hit the minus sign to remove Cosmonaut. Tap it again to go back here. And instead of choosing one of the recents, we'll look at what Logic has. Logic has a bunch of effects to the point where you really don't need to buy any third-party ones if you don't want to. They have amps for guitar and bass and delay, distortion, amazing reverb effects like Space Designer and Chromaverb, which I really like. Chromaverb has a really cool interface and a bunch of presets. And if you hit the default preset button when you're in a plugin, the browser now shows you the presets for that plugin, at least for the Apple ones. So let's choose a room. Actually, let's choose a hall, and we'll do film music hall. Although in this case, we're putting reverb on reverb, so I'm going to turn the reverb off on gadget, or on module rather. And I won't go too in the weeds on sound design. I think I've done videos on sound design before, so I'll probably link to that somewhere. But you can really get into custom sound design too. And there's just so much you can do with this. And I think if you hit all of these buttons to hide the entire interface, it can seem really simple. But it's actually really complex. There's the browser, the inspector here, a little mixer to see the volume of whatever track you're on as it's playing. And you can change it. You can pan left and right, double tap to bring back to center, double tap to bring your volume back to standard or to the default value. S is solo, M is mute. These are pretty standard. That mixture we talked about earlier, you can also see all of your sounds at once here and what volume they're playing at. You can add effects by, I believe, hitting plus sign. Now you can add effects in the mixer as well. We're not going to get too into that, but that's just to say that some people might think this is a really simple app, and there are ways it's simple, but it really has a lot of headroom to be complex. Now, I think I'm going to end it here. There's so much more I could talk about, but hopefully this gave you a good idea of the basics of how to use this app. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below, and if you've been using the app and have any tips and tricks for people, please share those as well. If you did enjoy the video, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe. Thank you so much to everyone who's already done that. The channel passed 10,000 subscribers this year, and I can't believe it. And if you want to go above and beyond, checking out my music on Spotify or Apple Music or Bandcamp, anywhere you listen to it, I have an album called There's Something Better, and it would be awesome if you check that out, but no worries if not. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead, and I hope this video brought some value for you. All right, I'll see you soon.